As we are on the verge of World War III, we are joined today by Steve Quayle here on Brighteon.com for an exclusive interview about the escalation to nuclear war. Welcome, Steve. You need no introduction. I'll plug your website here, by the way. Where is it? SteveQuayle.com. People want to see it. But Steve, welcome to the show. I know you have a lot of concerns to share, a lot of new intel. Where do you want to begin?
Well, I think we'd better begin that to get everyone's attention. This is World War III taking place before our eyes. The strategic placement of NATO and Western and U.S. assets into Western Europe is unparalleled. The threats and counter threats going on behind the scenes that I'm being made aware of by people that are very, very concerned, Mike, and rightfully so. I think people have got to recognize that this is all the globalist master plan to destroy 9/10 of the world's population. It's no longer a fantasy or a fear porn or, whatever they accuse anybody who's ever told the truth about real history. This is playing out before our eyes, and President Putin basically told NATO what to go do with themselves.
Теперь несколько важных, очень важных слов для тех, у кого может возникнуть соблазн со стороны вмешаться в происходящее событие. Кто бы ни пытался помешать нам, а тем более создать угрозы для нашей страны, для нашего народа, должны знать, что ответ России будет незамедлительным и приведет вас к таким последствиям, с которыми вы в своей истории еще никогда не сталкивались. Мы готовы к любому развитию событий. Все необходимые в этой связи решения приняты. Надеюсь, что я буду услышан.
And the point being is that we now have the most incendiary series of events taking place, and President Putin is very concise in what he says, unlike the U.S. foreign policy. We get into China, Taiwan, and later, but I think what everybody needs to understand is that World War I and World War II, especially World War I, started in June with the assassination, actually June 28th, I think it was, 1914, of Archduke Ferdinand. So we're in the time where war is in the air. War is absolutely being prepared before our eyes. And Russia has been preparing for this day since we started abrogating our treaty. They're in a full wartime economy, contrary to the United States with the entire bioweaponized attack and the tearing down of our country's infrastructure, both financially, agriculturally, and morally, obviously. We're now in a, how should I say this, a period where the slightest miscalculation will absolutely change the face of history, and it'll change the face, the literal face, of the United States of America. The United States has been posturing, just let me finish the statement, as if everything that's going on in the war is going to stay in Western and Eastern Europe. It isn't. It's coming here to our shore.
You make a really critical point, and you're exactly right when you say one miscalculation can set this whole thing off, and yet we have a State Department with people like Victoria Nuland in it and Antony Blinken. It should probably be called the U.S. State Department of Miscalculation, because that's all they do, is they miscalculate all the time. But specifically, over the last week, Putin has said that if the United States or NATO countries launch F-16s to conduct combat operations against Russia, if those F-16s are launched from NATO military bases, even outside of Ukraine, such as Poland, for example, then those bases become legitimate targets for Russia to nuke. Okay, so and then also, beyond that, he said then more recently, obviously this is a paraphrase because he said it in Russian, but if the U.S. supplies the weapons, such as the HIMARS rockets that Ukraine uses to attack Crimea, then the United States is in fact involved in the war, and it makes U.S. military bases legitimate targets in the eyes of Vladimir Putin. So, Steve, aren't we looking at, I mean, these are the triggers. We now know exactly what they are, and nobody's backing down.
Nobody's backing down, and even the back channel. We used to see the Cold War, even movies, that there was a red line, a hotline between Moscow and the United States. The United States, I'm told, killed our hotline to Moscow. So in essence, the Russians know that they cannot negotiate with crazy people. And that's pretty much a true statement. But what we're dealing with, Mike, and this is what's critical for people to understand, is that we are watching the intentional provocation of a superior nuclear power, Russia, by an inferior nuclear power at this point, the United States of America. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is not propaganda. That's just true. And when you're dealing with the hypersonic nuclear weapons and also the hyperbaric weapons, a hyperbaric weapon is a fuel-air explosive, and they can get equal yield out of a thermobaric bomb as to the equivalent blast, if you will, of a nuclear weapon without the fallout. But what I'm concerned about is I'm concerned about a major destruction of the nuclear power plants in the Ukraine area, and then they're going to blame it on the Russians. And look, we've seen, you mentioned Victoria Nuland and Blinken, we have seen time and time again threats made by our State Department, i.e. the Nord Stream pipeline. And now, I mean, people better understand something. We are at war with Russia, and they are at war with not only the United States and the West, but targeting is critical. The F-16s that you're talking about that Denmark is going to supply, they need a retrofit and an upgrade. Not every F-16 can carry nuclear armaments, but the ones that President Putin is talking about, they have no way of knowing where the F-16s that are being, how should I say this, articulated or updated, better word, updated to be able to handle nuclear weapons. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going nuclear. That's no longer BS. We've heard from the Biden administration all through this escalating tension period that, oh, the Russians will never use nukes, never use nukes. As we're recording this today, on the front right-hand corner of Drudge, Biden now says, Russia prepared to use nukes. What changed that, Mike?
Okay, yeah, I just brought up that article, Jerusalem Post. Biden says Russian threat of Putin using nuclear weapons is real. Of course, what does Biden know? I mean, his presidency isn't even real. But here's another story from the National Pulse. German ammo now below NATO required levels. So Germany's running out of ammo. We know that the United States is running out of ammo. Ukraine's out of ammo. And the ability for Western nations to manufacture ammo is severely impaired. It would be years to even build the infrastructure to start building more ammo.
Well, that's due to America's idiotic foreign policy and all of our sanctions. What we did was sanction ourselves. You know, sanction in the world of clandestine services means you're murdering somebody. Well, you know, the sanctions that we have put on Russia is self-sufficient. Russia has the ability and the raw materials. It's just like everybody in America wants to go, you know, electric cars, but they don't understand without China and without China's export of the different strategic minerals and metals, you know, we can't build those. So here's the thing. When people think of warfare, what has happened in the Ukraine, no matter what NATO and the United States intentions were, we have burned through all of the weapon systems, conventional weapons, that pretty much are in play. And again, as someone who knows people in the world, people in the world who are out there selling weapons on the International Weapons Bazaar, I don't know the actual dealers. I know people who are watching the deals. Mike, everything that we have given to Ukraine that hasn't been used in the way of artillery shells, man pads, rocket launchers, AT-4s, it's all ending up on the black market, along with all the weapons that were abandoned in Afghanistan. And people need to understand. Right. Yeah, people need to understand that was almost $100 billion worth. So in essence, we're naked. And now we're rattling our sabers against China, and then Blinken goes with his tail between his legs, and China mocks him and kicks him out of the country and won't even talk to him. and this is phenomenal. We've lost Japan as an ally. That's what my sources are telling me behind the scenes.
Well, the U.S. has become an embarrassment under this regime and this State Department. Look, the United States State Department at the top, and I don't mean to impugn every single person who works there. There are good people in every organization, but at the top, let's face it, it's virtue signaling moron, libtard lunatics who don't know anything about economics, geopolitics, history, war, anything. I mean, they are absolutely clueless about everything. And they are marching us into, I mean, you know, Joe Biden likes to bully people, likes to act tough and do his John Wayne act. Oh, like I was kicking Corn Pop's butt, you know. No, you weren't. This is what America is doing as a nation. And Russia is done with that. Russia's done negotiating with America. Russia is laying out the cause-effect, what's going to happen if you launch missiles at us in Crimea. Russia's going to nuke NATO military bases. If you launch F-16s with nuclear weapons, Russia's going to nuke American military bases and maybe American cities. I mean, we're at the moment where it is now, it's an if-then statement. If you do this, then that happens. We know what happens.
They're not posturing. They're telling plain and simple. Look, I posted, and you and I have talked about it, the different targets. Russia's made it clear their targets. The cities, the continuity of government bases, and I want everybody to understand something. The civil defense of Russia is unparalleled. The United States doesn't have any civil defense. And when you're dealing with nuclear war policy, civil defense is a big deal. Mutual assured destruction is gone. And so now what we have is we have belligerents in our Western sphere rattling a saber that they can't back up. Russia can get their nukes. And listen, this is real stuff. This isn't make-believe, and this isn't propaganda. But you and the average, let me just change that. We, the average Americans, don't understand how fast 90 seconds can take place. So in essence, the hypersonic missiles have been the game changers, and our own traitors and treachery, treason, and I would say this, just outright sellouts to our enemies have absolutely given our enemies, in this case, the advances in their weapon system. It's pretty sad when North Korea has, and I mean this, North Korea has hypersonic missiles. It's pretty sad when the United States still doesn't have them. And Mike, it's like everybody can't grasp the fact that Russia is ready to move, and they tried the bargaining table. You can't bargain with insanity. And
that's the thing. Yeah, you can't. You can't negotiate with virtue signaling lunatics because they're not rooted in reality. Now, but let me ask you a more practical question, Steve. And I'd like you to imagine what happens domestically in America the moment the first nuke goes off in Europe, where a NATO military base is nuked. I don't even mean a nuclear artillery round in Ukraine. I'm talking about where Putin launches, let's say, a hypersonic Kinzhal missile with a nuclear payload. And I don't know how many kilotons is on that, but I think it's less than a megaton for that particular missile.
Yeah, actually, it's not.
It really?
Some of they're 5 MTs, 5 megatons.
That can be carried on the Kinzhal?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And remember, and Mike, here's where we got to make the biggest difference in thinking to get people to provoke them to think. At no point did Russia only say tactical nuclear missiles, except in the relationship to Belarus, okay?
Right.
They're talking about intercontinental ballistic missiles. Again, the continuity of government bases were never designed to maintain 25 megaton multiple hits, especially with bunker busters. Now, here is where the insanity lies. There are intermittent reports of this group of people's in this bunker, that bunker, Denver International Airport, the continuity of government, and for most people's information, when Washington is wiped out, the provisional capital of the United States, what's left of it, is Denver. But the Russians have made it clear, look, you don't possess the weapon systems or the throw weight, in other words, the megaton weapons. That's why the 100 megaton Poseidon nuclear torpedoes are real. And in essence, it can't get any plainer. So what I'm saying is we got to take it out of the tactical realm and put it into the strategic realm. And we're talking ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Russia possesses that capability with multiple independent targeted reentry vehicles, multiple warheads that are steerable. And look, when you tell the truth nowadays, well, how dare you? No, we dare to tell the truth because lives are at stake, and it is going to it's going to impact, and it means the death of potentially hundreds of millions of Americans. And that's where the Deagle report comes in, because again, ladies and gentlemen, all this is being manipulated by the globalists, provoked by the globalists to bring about their ultimate desire, and that's the extinction of 90% of human beings.
All right,
and
so let me...
Go ahead.
No, Steve, let me bring up this graphic because it perfectly illustrates what you were just talking about. So here are Russia's nuclear missiles, or not all of them are nuclear, but you see here the Iskander right here, 500-kilometer range, which launching from Kaliningrad can reach all these areas. Then you have the Topol M, 11,000-kilometer range. Basically, it can reach everywhere on the planet other than maybe the southern half of South America. And then you've got, of course, here the big boy, the Sarmat and the Sarmat 2, which is also already being deployed, and plus these other missiles. And the Yars, don't forget the 24 Yars here, which is called the SS-27, I think, in NATO. This also has 11,000-kilometer range. So, Steve, what you're saying is absolutely true. Russia can hit every target in every Western city, every Western military base, anywhere in the world, Europe, United States, freaking North Pole, you name it, everywhere.
Well, everywhere, and that's their policy. They are on record. Listen, there's nothing. The only ones that are duplicitous in this whole equation are the, how do I say this, are the lying mouthpieces for what America's capabilities are. We cannot intercept hypersonic missiles. Any talk of that, the Patriot success, that's all bogus. So with the missile diagrams that you just put up and the ability to strike any place, here's what Russia's already said. Look, if we get threatened with an existential threat to be wiped out, we're going to play our dead hand. That's where they will fire all their missiles concurrently and simultaneously at all their pre-chosen targets. And Mike, I don't believe because of Bible prophecy that's going to happen, but I believe, and this is where most people go, in my opinion, wrong on the end times and the lateness of the hour, is they think that somehow America's got to even exist for the Antichrist system to rise. You're watching the Antichrist system rise here, but again, we're watching in America the provocation, in my opinion, of hundreds of millions of American lives at risk. And you said, what's going to happen? Let me take you back to your question. What's going to happen the minute a nuclear weapon goes off? Let's say if it stays contained, a tactical nuclear weapon in Belarus, Ukraine, whatever, most people will just yawn. They will.
Really?
Yeah, they will. I mean, I'm telling you, they'll just say, "Oh, it's over there," And I'm sorry to sound so sarcastic. I can't even bring enough sarcasm together. But what does make a difference when one happens here? The question is, will the first nuke that goes off in America be a false flag? Will it be? And I want people to understand this. We are watching insanity on a level that cannot even be put into the context of normal war theory, in my opinion. And what that simply means is, what nation in its wisdom would piss off, sorry for the word, but it's true, piss off every single ally it had prior to initiating that war, and then turn on our allies and basically send mixed signals? When Taiwan, you remember the story that they were talking, U.S. talking about taking out, bringing out, what's the word I want? Taking out of Taiwan 80,000 American citizens.
Yeah.
That's
an evacuation, man.
Evacuation, that's the word I want. And that sent a signal to Japan. And ladies and gentlemen, most people have no idea of the sophistication of Japan's defense industry. It's incredibly sophisticated.
Okay.
And so just let me give you this real quick. The Taiwanese, their ability to produce the most sophisticated integrated circuits in the world are necessary for Russia, the United States, and everybody. But it was even insanely announced that the United States would bomb Taiwan's chip factory to keep it out of the hands of the Russians. Did you see that?
That's been discussed for several months, and that's crazy.
So it's crazy. So how do you know that you've got a death sentence when you agree with the United States? Now, listen, I love the country that was. We no longer are the country we were. This is not the land of the home, the free and the brave anymore. This is an absolute nation bent on the self-destruction, at war with its people, and trying to provoke the rest of the world to basically rejoice when America disappears. And Mike, this is really critical. You and I spoke on your show, a year ago, about Operation Sandman. People abandoning the U.S. dollar. Then in those days, it was just the BRICS nation and the potential for 3 more. Now, as of last week, we're up to 120 nations that are repudiating the U.S. dollar. Yeah. And all of the income that's coming in by the Treasury bills, new offerings, and whoever's buying them is just going to pay interest. We are in no position to fight a war financially. Getting back to Russia's ability, Russia has portable launch capability of their intercontinental ballistic missiles. You've seen them. They can launch ICBMs. They have reloadable silos. The U.S. has one-time use. And to my knowledge, and I stand corrected, but people I know in the Defense Department said, Steve, we don't launch out of our silos. We take the missiles out and we launch from Vandenberg or a different base, because once we launch a missile out of the U.S. silos, that silo's toast. In other words, fire once and it's done. Whereas everything Russia does is redundant. Now, I believe, Mike, and this is what probably is going to be that most people cannot embrace. I believe because of our nation's perversity, our nation's mutilation of our young people, the absolute gender dysphoria, the absolute attack on everything of humanity that's good and wonderful and beautiful. I believe Russia is literally raised up to be God's instrument of judgment. And people who don't know their history, biblical history and secular history, don't understand that, because they think somehow that we have the moral high ground. We flow in the sewers of moral debauchery compared to even Caligula, So
yeah,
but again, but there's hardly a yawn, hardly a whimper. So that's why I think the very first thing, the thing that's going to tee off most Americans is when everything they've taken for granted is no longer available. For instance, ladies and gentlemen, the minute, and we got to get to this at some point, Mike, the minute that martial law is declared, you're going to be given food rations based on calorie count, not a pound of butter, a dozen eggs, calorie count. You're going to be given fuel in liter measurements, and that's if there's anything left. I maintain when this thing happens, the war will be fought and won literally within the first hour or less.
See, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to bring up the same point. The chain reaction that gets initiated is rapid. So, think about this. F-16s carrying nuclear weapons take off from Warsaw, let's say. They fly east into Ukraine. They engage with Russia to try to provide air cover for Ukraine's forces, which have lacked air cover and thus have been largely decimated by Russian helicopters, for example. Russia sees these incoming F-16s. What do? They nuke the base in Warsaw, let's say, or right outside of Warsaw where this it was launched. And that would be a hypersonic missile nuke, all right? No defense against it. That nuke detonates. What do other Western nations in Europe do? They launch nukes at Russia, like within 2 minutes, right? They launch nukes at Russia. Russia sees the incoming nukes. What does Russia do? They launch everything. And
that's accurate.
Yeah, they launch everything at the West.
Yes.
There goes New York. There goes Washington, D.C. There goes Houston, Texas. There goes Los Angeles. It's done. North America is a radioactive wasteland.
Well, and here's something that really is critical in what we're talking about today, Mike, and that's the fact that if you've got a 90-second window to launch, which Russia does, and you compare it and contrast it to 5 to 7 minutes of the U.S., Western NATO, all the sign-offs, all the codes, all of that crap, Russia can say, okay, we'll give them a minute, we'll give them 2 minutes, and then take them out in the air, our nukes, and then take out every single air base. And I'm told this is part of the plan. They've made it clear. Every single air base in Western Europe capable of, basically landing and supplying and supporting and refueling aircraft, they take them all out at once. And they have the numeric capability. How long will people put up with the lying narrative? Well, Russia's running out of missiles. No, they're not. They're on a 24/7 war footing, and they have been for the last 9 years. So, they don't run out of weapons. The thing that's astonishing to me is the only thing that the lunatic West has run out of is critical thinking. And if I were a Russian, and I'm not a Russian agent, the bottom line is, and I saw NATO talking about, and this was open source information, dividing up my country into 41 separate member states, and everybody that joins in the, let's say, cluster attack against Moscow. I mean, imagine that. Imagine we were facing everybody sitting off our borders, which we will be when the Chinese are in Cuba and Panama, as Michael Yon says, and everything. Yeah. And the thing is that we're now in Crazyville, okay? But Crazyville has a cost to live there, and that's the thermonuclear annihilation of the West. Now,
but let me
go ahead.
Well, I want to bring you back to the question earlier, which you haven't really answered this yet. Pardon me for being so blunt, but I want you to talk about what happens domestically when the first nuke hits America. So,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, tell us what's going to happen, to banks, to the price of gold, to the grocery stores, to transportation, to people, to cities. What's that going to look like?
Within minutes, the country will go into an extended panic. The extended panic will clear out what's ever available in gas stations, and people will want to fill up to drive their car, and they won't be able to drive their car because there's no place to drive their car to. Their food will disappear in a heartbeat. Already, we're seeing reports of military equipment being dispersed throughout the whole country. And the thing that people have got to understand is containment of the major cities. So you're going to have panic, you're going to have mayhem, you're going to have Mad Max on steroids. And this is what the military is going to have to do. They're going to have to cordon off, for instance, L.A. And it doesn't matter if it's L.A. proper or it goes out to the San Bernardino Mountains, how far. I'm just telling you this, that Jamie Walton made the statement. He said, Steve, we practice for shutting down, he's Marine. He said, we practice shutting down cities of 20 million people. We could do it in, I think he said, less than an hour. And he may have said 20 minutes. Jamie, I may be misquoting you, but under an hour, the military can stop off-ramps, on-ramps, and they can bring a halt to everything, Mike. And then it's Mad Max, when each man does that which is right in his own sight. Now, what are we going to deal with? We're going to deal with gangs that already know this stuff. We're going to deal with foreign invasionary forces that are already positioned this, and they have supply, they have food, they have ammo, and then it's going to be, and I'm sorry to say this, and I hate to say it, but it's going to be the ultimate bloodbath, because when people panic, the people that have anticipated the panic, and I'm talking about foreign military soldiers in our country, whether it's Chinese, whether it's Iranian, whether it's the cartel, whoever, they know exactly what their goals are. And we've seen, kudos to Hal Turner, posting the picture on the Mexican border of all the, the armor, and not only the armor, but all of the, military equipment. So where is that all coming from? So I hope I'm answering. You're going to see the minute that happens in the United States, you're going to see panic like you've never seen it before. And I'm telling you, it's going to manifest itself. And this is why the golden rule of survival, and I want everyone to hear me, you want to be where everyone else isn't at that moment. You don't want to be. And that's where look, you've spent your whole life on your business and your broadcasting, podcasting, all the productions that you've done. I've spent my life, everything, telling people, trying to get people ready for this moment. And this moment was always put off, but now it's here. So I hope I'm being specific.
You are, yeah, but
mayhem unimaginable.
let me, yeah, there you go. There's the quote for it, mayhem unimaginable. But the most likely scenario that you're describing then is after a nuke strikes the United States, the military deploys domestically to try to quell the panic/uprising in the cities. And they block off the cities, which would essentially, I guess, trap people in the cities. Otherwise, you would have a mass exodus coming out of the cities going, I guess, sweeping across all rural areas. But the cities would become unmanageable. The police would be powerless at that point, especially in a lot of these cities like LA or Seattle. And so doesn't that just look like a, Kurt Russell escape from LA scenario at that point?
Perfect. And I was just going to say, the best example is Kurt Russell, one of my favorite actors, by the way, and Escape from LA and Escape from New York. And ladies and gentlemen, the plan is, and Mike, you touched on it, the plan is to stop millions of people who they can contain in the cities and to basically imprison them because it's easier to control that population than trying to go out and get every straggler. And this is why, people have got to understand something. There are field manuals. I used to know the names of all of them. I don't anymore. But field manuals for the very thing we're talking about, operational plans, because this is, and Mike, for the first time again, I heard the term coming from, let's just say this, the people that came up with zombie protocol. I'm not saying there's going to be a bunch of flesh-eating zombies, but I am saying this, that in that mindset, anybody other than the controlling powers that be are considered zombies, okay? So it's all going to be about containing and basically, sorry to say this, but containment and destruction of those populations that will represent a threat to the authorities at that point. Am I being clear?
Yeah, you absolutely are. And I think you don't even have to say it, but of course gun confiscation would be part of this. Bank bail-ins would be part of this. Food rationing would be part of it. Because
let's just talk about the gun collection.
Okay.
The only thing that stands between them and you, everybody's listening to this podcast, is your ability under the Second Amendment to protect your family. I've said it over and over, and I got to emphasize it even more. The only thing that stands, and I believe in the active intervention of prayer. I believe in the active intervention of identifying evil, but I also believe in my dear friend Greg Evenson, who's passed away. He a wonderful man, famous state trooper, but he always had his 45 in his right hand, and he was a 45 guy, ACP, and his Bible in the left hand. And that so made an impression on my life, just like one of your statements, that in essence, we're dealing now, ladies and gentlemen, they want to take our guns to kill us. The old argument, they're going to come and get the guns. No, they're coming to kill the gun owners. It can't get any plainer than the vice president's statement. They got to do away with 120 million people. Well, that should infuriate 120 million people.
But isn't it?
Go ahead.
Well, Steve, sorry to interrupt, but isn't it likely that once Russia nukes the United States, that China would activate its operatives that are already pre-positioned in the U.S.? And so we the people would be facing probably the military deployed against us, Russia nuking us, and China sabotaging all the infrastructure domestically and running around trying to kill, mayors, senators, police chiefs, anybody they could kill who's in a position of authority in the United States to try to cause mass chaos. I mean, we'd be fighting a three-front war domestically in the U.S. at that point, it seems.
Well, yeah, and the question is, and that's a very good question, because according, and I stand by the source of this, there's 500,000 Chinese pre-positioned, military-aged and trained men in the United States right now with components. Okay?
Right, and once they're activated, then that's a whole nother war.
It's a whole nother war. And Mike, remember, we have their statements We have the white papers from the Chinese that said they have no qualms killing every man, woman, and child in the United States.
Right.
And that's a statement. No one can argue with that. That's their white papers. And they said, look, we have 1.3 billion at that point, the statement was made, and we can lose 300 million people, and we got 1 billion left. You guys have, 300 billion, and we can take you all out. And they've made this clear. They have no moral restraint to killing every man, woman, and child. I would think that would be motivation not to give up your guns. And again, ladies and gentlemen, guns without training, let's call them firearms without training, and the determined that no one's going to get to my family, my loved ones, my kids. In the book of Nehemiah in the Old Testament, Nehemiah, said, fight for your families, fight for your little ones. And that was to a nation at that point that had been conquered. And so what we have to recognize is this. No one, and I say this, no one outside of the living God and the people that share your commitment to keeping one another alive are going to be trustworthy. And what's going to be happening, it's going to be beyond, I don't even know a correct term, maybe you can come up with one, but it's going to be the ultimate paranoia that's going to be driving everything. And, again, Mike, it's a it's a 4-front war, because thrown into this is we're going to have to be dealing with demons. I'm talking literal evil spirits. We're going to be dealing with people that want to do nothing but wreck mayhem. Even I saw a Target shirt and a sweatshirt, and it showed a guillotine, and it showed, it said homophobe headrest. Did you see that?
No, I saw a reference to it, but I haven't seen the shirt myself.
But anyway, so what, ladies and gentlemen, here is the thing. The rest of the world doesn't want anything to do with the vomitous, the hideous, the projection, and that's what our State Department had, of wokeness, of brokenness. And when I say brokenness, the nation is watching, the nations of the world are watching what's happening to the U.S. military. The nations of the world are watching what's happening to the U.S. government. And Mike, one of the questions that's asked, I have a friend, and basically his wife is Russian, beautiful, beautiful woman. I talked to her. We talk in English, of course. And I asked him to ask his wife, what's the attitude? She's in Moscow right now. And do you know the average attitude in Moscow? And this lady's lovely, and she's not a warrior, but what are we, the Russians, waiting for? They know that the United States is going to initiate a false, when I say false, they're going to try and initiate an attack on Russia proper by swarming. Swarming means they're going to throw aircraft, drones, everything at once. But what America doesn't understand, and the military better understand this, not a threat, just an encouragement. You guys don't have electronic warfare dominance. Russia does. And let me give you an example of that. Can I just give that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead. But we got to wrap up this segment after that.
Yeah, because in electronic warfare dominance, we're watching, look at the tornadoes and the devastation of weather. I talked to Gary Haven just 2 hours ago before broadcasting and recording this show, and he's a high-time pilot. He's been flying for 40 years, 15, 20,000 hours. But he said, Steve, in all my years of flying, I've never seen thunderheads at 70,000 feet. And he said, and stacked up one right after another. Well, that doesn't happen in nature. That happens in weather modification. So I'll close this part of the segment out by saying this. You're going to see instantaneous extreme weather like you've never seen it before in history. Forget the hurricane system, season. You're going to see landicanes, okay? You're going to see absolute horrific hailstorms. It's going to be spontaneously generated by the massive upper atmospheric control of weatherized weapons and weather warfare. And Mike, it's going to be, pun intended, I don't mean to sound corny, but it's going to be devastating beyond description.
Well, I want to talk about that in our next segment, so just stand by. But folks, first, let me give credit to our sponsor, the satellite phone store, SAT123. So I know you use them too.
Need to understand, Mike, you and I have warned people that they sell out of them. Right now, they're out of the Inmarsat phones, but they do have the Iridium phones.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that's really important because I think they have about 1,000 of them. And what's happened, ladies and gentlemen, the communication cables, the fiber optic deep sea ocean cables have been cut between the West Coast and Southeast Asia. That doesn't mean all communications are down, but what's going to happen when this thing takes place, the EMP, whether it's an airburst, electromagnetic pulse, there are different ways to, how should I say this, enforce or supercharge the electromagnetic pulse. That's a better word. And so I want people to understand you need to go to beready123.com, beready123.com, because the power banks, and we've done shows on those, this stuff sells out fast. And so somebody says, well, if it's the end of the world, why is that important? Because everybody goes nuts in the dark. And that's a good answer.
Yeah, that's
everybody
true.
Goes nuts in the dark.
Okay, beready123.com. I've got that up. Yeah, and look, but my position is, Steve, they're not going to kill all of us, but they are going to kill those who are not prepared. That's the thing. If you're easy to kill, what the globalists have planned and World War III is going to take you out. If you're hard to kill, if you're resilient, if you've got backup food and medical supplies, emergency communications, off-grid sources of electricity, water supply, all these things, you can make it through this. I'm not saying it's going to be a pretty world, but you don't have to die. That's
well,
the whole point.
And failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And again, Mike, this is critical. If you think this statement through, and I know we got to close it out, the segment, but you want to be where everyone else isn't. If everyone's going to the last ditch store, Piggly Wiggly, or whatever grocery store, Aldi's, whatever, Safeway, Best Way, No Way, and pretty soon all out of the way. You don't want to be there, but be there now. And again, understand, ladies and gentlemen, when the official ration cards come, it's on a per calorie per person day, and that it's sub 1,500 calories.
Ooh, boy, there's a weight loss program for America.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about in the next segment, Steve. So stand by. We're going to talk about famine, rationing, and the CBDCs that you'll be required to sign up for in order to get your food credits so that you don't starve to death. They're going to try to ensnare you in the mark of the beast system. So Steve, stand by. We'll do the next segment. I just want to give everybody, again, your website, stevequayle.com. And Steve Quayle's our guest. Check out his website and all his headlines here that he's posting daily about breaking news and much more. And feel free to repost this interview on other platforms and channels as well. I'm Mike Adams here, Brighteon.com, joined by Steve Quayle. One more segment coming up.